I'm Hugh Taylor, currently the Harold Mitchell Professor of Indigenous Eye Health at the University of Melbourne School of Population Health, and I head up what's called the Indigenous Eye Health Unit. I was born in Melbourne, did my medical training at the University of Melbourne, and out of the Austin Hospital in the first group of students in the new clinical school they started there. I spent a year doing a Bachelor of Medical Science with Peter Morris, later Sir Peter Morris, working on transplantation immunology in renal transplantation. But I started my residency or registrar training in ophthalmology in 1974 at the Eye and Ear. In those days, the college had not been set up with a formal exam, and so I sat the College of Surgeons first part exam and learnt the 7 layers of the foot and all that other useful stuff. I passed the University of Melbourne Diploma of Ophthalmology in my second year, and I think I was probably the last person to, I think Justin O'Day and I sat together, but we were the last two to do the old DO. And then at the start of my third year, I sat the second part of the College of Surgeons ophthalmology exam and passed, so that I had the rest of my third year without having to worry about exams, which was good. In the middle of second year, Fred Hollows had organised a teaching weekend for the registrars up in Sydney, and there were about 6 or 8 of us who jumped on the overnight Spirit of Progress, took the train up to Sydney, and from memory there, I think there were 3 orthoptists who travelled up with us, so we had a pretty good party on the way up, and spent fascinating time with Fred in this clinic, learning about different science, particularly about looking at the disc, a bit about thyrotoxicosis and so forth. And he had patients lined up in the outpatients there at Prince of Wales Hospital for us to look at the back of the disc. And one of the guys was Patrick White, the Nobel laureate author, who'd sort of come in on his Saturday so that he could have 20 or 30 registrars look at his disc, which is amazing. So Fred obviously had quite a range of contacts. On the Saturday evening, he had a party for us at his house, at Farnham House in Randwick, which is not far from the hospital. And there was beer and wine and all that sort of stuff, and a little bag of marijuana sitting on the table for those who were so inclined. So he was quite a different sort of person, dressed as a hippie with turtleneck shirts, often with a little chain around his neck. His teeth had worn down from where he continued to chew his pipe, which was a sort of a curved Peterson pipe, always smoked Aramore flake tobacco. And so that was sort of fun. And it was interesting to meet this guy. He was quite different from the other professor that I knew well, Jerry Crock in Melbourne, who was more prone to wear 3-piece suits and was very erect and proper. So that was the first time I met Fred. Dick Galbraith was the head of ophthalmology at the Melbourne, and he had been going to the Solomon Islands for quite a long time and took a registrar, one registrar a year with him on the trip to the Solomons. And I'd worked at the Melbourne as the registrar there, and I'd sort of half hoped I might be the one of the 3 that year who'd be picked, but he picked Mike Giles instead, so that blew that. And the college meeting was held in Perth that year in sort of late March or early April, and I'm now talking 1976. And I knew that Fred went up to Burke for a long weekend, sort of 3 or 4 times a year. He'd sort of drive up on a Thursday evening and sort of work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and drive back Sunday night or Monday. And so I said to Fred, "Hey Fred, listen, I'm not going to be going to the Solomons, but could I come up and join you on one of those weekends? It'd be really interesting." And he said, "Oh, sure, Taylor, we'll see what happens." And I didn't realise at that time, but the college was meeting, the college council was meeting concurrently with the Congress. Now we're finalising this arrangement with the Commonwealth Government to start the National Trachoma and Eye Health Project, which Fred was been pushing for and organised, but I knew nothing about that. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I get this phone call from Fred. Hey Taylor, we need you in Port Augusta on something like the 20th of May. We need you to do a couple of weeks' work for us. What do you think? I said, what do you say? So I went and spoke to Ken Howsam, who sort of who was the medical director at the Ioneer Hospital, medical superintendent, and really ran the hospital, a lovely guy. And because I'd passed the second part exam, had the fellowship, he said, sure, that'd be good. I had absolutely no idea what to expect. So I flew to Adelaide, and then I think drove up to, met some of the team in Adelaide, drove up to Port Augusta when we started to examine people in the clinic at Davenport, which is the Aboriginal community just outside Port Augusta. And there was a team of about 8 or 10 people, and nobody knew what they were doing. It was absolute chaos. You had people measuring vision. You had the beautiful Gabby, who later married Fred, who was a young orthoptist at the time, sort of measuring vision. Fred doing the trachoma grading, other people sort of registering people and stuff. And I was working there as the ophthalmologist, so if there was somebody seen with a problem or poor vision, we had a slit lamp, we could do a dilated exam and stuff like that. And after the 2 weeks, we'd worked our way up through Coober Pedy and up into the APY land to the Aboriginal communities in the Pinatjara country. My time was up and I went back to Australia, back to Melbourne. And while we were doing there, we'd found some children with mucopolysaccharidosis with really funny symptoms that turned out to be Hurler's syndrome. And this was really unusual and unexpected in Aboriginal people. So Fred said, well, come back in a couple of weeks and spend some time just tracking out the family tree, which I did. We ended up doing a paper on that. But and the team sort of rolled on. And then a little bit later, I got this phone call, hey Taylor, we need you to come and work as the assistant director of the program for the next year. I said, I can't do that. I mean, I've sort of committed to a corneal fellowship in Hopkins at the Wilma starting in July '77, and I can't sort of do that. I've got this full-time job at the Ioneer. I'm going to be a registrar until the beginning of February next year. He said, oh, don't worry about that, Taylor, we'll fix that up. So he'd obviously spoken to Ken Howsam, who said, fine, we'll give you a leave of absence from the hospital. And then Fred said, now Taylor, I need you to get a Range Rover and show up with a Range Rover in Alice Springs in 2 weeks. It was just ridiculous. So I went to Kellogg's Faulkner, who were the dealer for Range Rovers. They said, well, we've got one coming in, we'll sort of fast travel you. This is a federal government thing for Aboriginal people and all the college ophthalmologists. So I ended up with this new Range Rover. No, I didn't pay for it myself, but that and fitted it up, for the work in the bush with a rack and all that sort of stuff. And because we spent a lot of time out in the bush, and there was no way to keep alcohol or beer cold or anything like that, what we'd do in the evenings would be sit around a campfire with a bottle of whiskey. And you'd pour the screw cap full of whiskey, pass the bottle around, and each take a sip and then put the cap on, pass it to the next person. You're sitting in the dark. So I knew we were going to be out in the bush for quite a while, so I sort of bought a dozen bottles of whiskey cheap somewhere in Melbourne. And because it's hard, I was a pipe smoker at the time, it's hard to buy pipe tobacco. I bought a pack of a dozen tins or something of pipe tobacco. And Ron Lowe was an ophthalmologist coming up to spend another 2 weeks or so with the trachoma team, and we had a visiting ophthalmologist, a volunteer ophthalmologist with the trachoma team at all the time. And overall, over the year or two that it ran, there was something like 80 ophthalmologists who volunteered for 2 weeks or more to help and work on this team. So Ron was the most senior ophthalmologist in Melbourne, and I picked Ron up. We drove up and we got sort of halfway between Port Augusta, Wentworth and probably Coober Pedy when it got dark, so we just sort of laid out on the, pulled off the side of the road, laid out our swags, and here's Ron Lowe, the most senior ophthalmologist in Melbourne, sort of camping out under the stars with us. Then we got to Alice the next day, and Fred kept on giving me a hard time ever after. He said, well, bloody Taylor, he shows up for work with a new car, a dozen bottles of scotch, a whole lot of tobacco, and an orthopterist. I don't know where he threw the orthopterist in, but that was just to give me a bad name. So I then worked with that team through to June 1977. And in that time, we covered the area around Central Australia and then moved through Western Australia up into the Kimberley. But while we were doing that, the team we'd have a liaison officer who would go out in front, talk to the communities, let them know we're coming. A team of about 6 or 7 people who would aim to examine everybody in the community and then move on to the next community. For a long time we were based in Alice Springs. We had one of the old hospital houses there that we called Trachoma House, and it's still there, but it's used for other purposes now, of course. And so we'd go out to the bush for maybe 2 weeks or so, come back for a day or two, drop off all our forms we'd filled in, pack up new forms, get more food, and then head out to another community. But while we were doing this, we found that there were a lot of people who needed cataract surgery particularly, or trichiasis, pterygium. And so Fred had organised with the Australian Army to have one of the Army field hospitals fly in. And the first one we had was in Armata in northern South Australia, where Dick Galbraith was the lead surgeon, and I was the responsible for organising and running the camp. And we had the largest eye hospital in the Southern Hemisphere for about 2 weeks, with about 100 Army soldiers and support people. Big theatre tents, lots of these MASH tents, operating tents that all blown up with compressed air. And we did about 100 cataracts and about 20 or 30 extraocular procedures. And patients would be flown in and out in the Australian Army Pilatus Porter, which was the spotter plane they'd used in Vietnam. And the guys loved the camp because it was the first real work they'd done since they'd been pulled out of Vietnam 2 years before. So that was very good. And the second camp we did was up at Utopia, which is up north of Alice Springs, which was in early 77. And David Kaufman came along, as well as Dick Galbraith, to help on that program. But I then left the team in June 1977 up in the Kimberley, and we'd sat there in Derby or Broome and looked at what we need to do over the next 6 months to finish the work, and sort of worked out a map for 3 teams to sort of go across round through the top end and down through Queensland. But by the time that the team got to Queensland, the state elections were starting in Queensland, and Bjelke Peterson was very upset that some of the Aboriginal liaison people who were working with the Trachoma team might encourage those terrible Aboriginal people to vote, and they were unlikely to vote for the Country Party, or the National Country Party, which Bjelke Peterson was. So he shut the thing down, kicked them out of Queensland, which was a big fight between Malcolm Fraser, the Prime Minister at the time, and Bjelke Peterson. But after Bjelke Peterson had won yet another gerrymandered election, they still had to go up the coast. So I was working at Hopkins, and I got again another bloody phone call from Fred Hollow. Hey Taylor, we need you in Brisbane in beginning of May. And I had to go to the Arvo meeting, which was that first week in May. You lose a day flying from the US to Australia, so it takes you 3 days to get there. And I said, look, the earliest I can leave is I forget the exact date, but something like the 5th of May, which means I'll get there on the 7th. He said, well, can't you get there any quicker, Taylor? I said, well, the only way I can do that is if I could get Concorde. I might be able to do it quicker, but there's no other way you can get there, Fred. So forever after, he said, oh, bloody Taylor, all he wants to do is fly Concorde. But I then came and spent about 6 or 8 weeks and led a team from Brisbane to Cairns, looking at all the Aboriginal people along the coast. And Fred was leading a team going up through central Queensland at the time. And so I sort of finished my field work with the Trachoma Program in the middle of 1978. And then we spent a year or two analysing and presenting the data. I'd done some separate studies through the Trachoma Program that I put together for a doctorate, an MD degree through the university. And the report came out in 1980 that published by the college that really showed what the issues were in terms of eye health. And Fred worked quite hard with the college and the Commonwealth to set up state committees to look at the ongoing provision and treatment of care to the Aboriginal people. But after about a year, this was all devolved to state control, and which Fred firmly opposed. And because he was concerned that once it had got down to the state level, it would all just dissipate, which in fact was actually what happened. And so while he still continued to try to move the ball forward and get things done, it really was so fragmented under the state control. And then at that time, the Aboriginal medical services were also being established. And so that there was some of that local politics as well, whether it should be run by the college or run by the Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. And so a lot of that initiative and impetus really fell away. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned subsequently is to have these things that are long-term and sustainable. You need to have national oversight and accountability. So there has to be somebody at the national level keeping oversight to make sure the work continues, which didn't happen.